and so I come to you for yet another Sunday Miscellany. This is my weekly feature where I go through the books that I have read for the week that I've made progress on or finished. I also talk about the music that I've listened to and liked, and also talk about some of the movies that I've watched and liked. And as you saw in my opening clip, I also just acquired a record player. It was not a Christmas present or anything like that. I didn't actually have to spend money on it. My parents just happened to have an extra one, and I recently have taken an interest in record players and records, and so I just decided to take it, and I took a couple of the classical records that they had at their house over the holidays, and brought them with me home. And I needed to buy a stereo and a record phonograph amplifier before it would, obviously play music, but now I have it functional, and I only own 7 records, including the one that you just saw. They're all classical at this point. 3 of them are violin concertos. I own Beethoven's Violin Concerto, Bruch's Violin Concerto, and Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, as well as On the Blue Danube by Johann Strauss, who's going to come up in a minute when I talk about the music I've listened to this week. And then I own a couple of Chopin records, and then The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, which actually isn't a favorite piece of mine, but it's still interesting to have. I see myself only really buying records of albums and pieces of music that are like favorites of all time, so I don't want like a huge massive collection. So yeah, but I'm sort of looking forward to it, and you might be able to hear the music continuing to play. I turned it down low so that it wouldn't be distracting for you, but it is still on, playing Johann Strauss's The Beautiful Danube. It's not just The Beautiful Danube, obviously that's not a long enough piece for an entire record, but it has a bunch of Johann Strauss's waltzes, and that's one of the big themes for my music for this week. I listened to a fair bit of Johann Strauss's music, and so my playlist for this week, I leave a Spotify playlist every week of the music that have some of the musical highlights of the week. And there's a number of waltzes by Strauss in that playlist, and there's also some excerpts from his opera, Die Fledermaus, which I listened to and which is delightful. I have not watched it or read the libretto or anything, but it's kind of a comic opera. It's really has a lot of really catchy tunes. I really enjoyed it. I'm not usually one for cheerful or happy music. You might have noticed in the musical recommendations I give, I tend to favor, when it comes to classical music, I like sort of minor key, brooding, or dramatic stuff. And when it comes to other music, I also tend to prefer stuff that's either pretty brooding or dark or dramatic, or at least that's quite solemn if it's not dark. But Johann Strauss I see as kind of a major exception to that, because I'm really loving his music. It really makes me happy and just content, I feel happy while listening to it. So there's a lot of Johann Strauss this week, and then I also listened to some French opera. I listened to Camille Saint-Saëns' Samson and Delilah, and there's one very famous aria from that in the playlist. And then I listened to The Tales of Hoffmann by Jacques Offenbach, which is one of his 2 most famous operas. His other most famous opera is Orpheus in the Underworld, which is sort of a parody of the Orpheus myth, and it has a very famous can-can music, which I'm certain you've heard, but I didn't listen to that this week. Actually, Orpheus in the Underworld is only the second opera that I have actually watched a live performance of, actually been in the theater and seen, obviously long before the days of COVID, but it is hilarious, it is delightful, I loved it. It was put on by Iowa State University, by the music department. It was a bunch of, music students who were performing in it, and they were great, and it was translated into English, but if it was translated, it was done very, very well. But that is a great opera, but the pieces I have here are from The Tales of Hoffmann. It's some of the orchestral pieces from it, rather than the arias. And then the only other piece that I have in there that's not classical is a piece that was used in Wong Kar-wai's film In the Mood for Love, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and it's just called Yumeji's theme, and it's composed by Shigeru Umebayashi, and it was originally used for a different film, and it is beautiful. So that's the music for this week, and the music for the next couple of weeks, I suspect, is going to be a bunch of Czech and Russian composers. The last 3 chapters in The Lives of the Great Composers by Harold Schonberg have all been about either Russian or Czech composers. So there was a chapter about the big 5 Russian composers, as well as Mikhail Glinka, And so that includes a lot of Rimsky-Korsakov, Mussorgsky, and Borodin. And then the chapter after that was on Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, who is one of my favorite composers. And then the chapter after that included sections about Bedřich Smetana, Antonin Dvorak, and Leo Šianicek, the sort of holy trinity of Czech composers. And I have a real thing for Russian composers especially. I also really love the three Czech composers, but Russian composers, I don't know what's in the water over there, but I just love their music. So I have a whole playlist put together for myself of all the music by these Czech and Russian composers that I'm going to listen to. And it's 32 hours long, so I may be talking to you about Czech and Russian composers for the next few weeks. So I'm not sure, I think I'll put this on hold for me to get through that. And then after that will be some more French music, and then after that we'll get into chapters on Puccini, which will be awesome, because he is one of my favorite composers, and then Richard Strauss, another favorite of mine. So that will be fun, but that's the plans for the next few weeks for my music. Moving on into books, I finished 4 pieces this week. I say pieces because 3 of them are books and 1 is not really a full book on its own, and I'll just start with that one because it's the one I'm going to talk the least about. It's in the Bible. I read the Gospel according to St. Matthew. I am rereading the New Testament this year, and I've decided that I'm going to do a series of videos about my experience rereading the New Testament, a series of book talks about each of the 4 Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Epistles of St. Paul. I'll do all the Epistles of St. Paul in one video, and then all the other minor epistles in one video, and then the Book of Revelation in one video. And I'm going to do a series of book talks on my experience rereading those, so I won't talk about it too much here. But yeah, look out for that video. It's going to be posted on Tuesday. And then I'll talk about the other books in the order in which I finished them. So the Inferno by Dante Alighieri, I read it in the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow translation in this edition, which has an introduction and introduction notes by Peter Bondanella. And I keep forgetting to mention that this was actually sent to me by Noah from Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse. I won a little giveaway that he did, and I won this book, and it's a really nice edition with the Gustave Doré Gustave Doré illustrations in it, and I loved rereading the Inferno. This is another one though where I'm going to do a whole other video about it, but something that I don't talk about in the video that I want to say here with reading the Inferno and reading the whole Divine Comedy, but especially I think the Inferno, is that whenever people talk about the fact that it's called the Commedia or the Divine Comedy, they talk about, you know, it being called a comedy because it ends well. It ends in salvation, in Dante joining with God. It ends, you know, it's written in a sort of, it's not written in a highfalutin language. It's written in Italian rather than Latin, and the protagonist isn't an epic hero. It's just Dante, the everyman. And people often talk about it as a comedy in that sense, but I also think that there are real comic elements, at least to the Inferno, not necessarily elements that you'll be laughing at that very much, but like, you know, you have a guy who like talks to Dante while holding his own head up, you know, and you have this scene where there are people with their legs sticking out of the ground who talk to him. You know, there are real elements of sort of almost slapstick comedy in it, really. Comedy in the modern sense of being almost funny, and I do wonder whether it would have been kind of laugh-out-loud funny to people in Dante's day, to Italian readers in his day, and maybe whether Italian readers of today might still find it funny. I don't know if some Italian people who read Italian want to comment on that, but yeah, so I just wanted to talk about that, but I'm gonna I have a whole video that's gonna be posted about this. And then I also finished The Tombs of Atuan by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I read in this gigantic edition of all of the Earthsea books and short stories. And The Tombs of Atuan ended up being really, really good. I ended up really liking it. I saw it, I kind of analyzed it as kind of almost a feminist allegory, because the main character, Arha, who's also called Tanar, is a priestess, a sort of high priestess of the Tomb of Atuan. And she's supposed to be this really powerful figure in the kingdom of Kar-god, where she lives, but really she actually has power over basically nothing, because it's discussed extensively in the novel that no one actually visits the Tombs of Atuan, which she is the high priestess of. And basically, it seems like the only things she's in charge of are rituals and executing people who commit some sort of crime. And the only time where we really see her exercise her power is in executing 3 men, basically, and that's kind of all. And so she has this ostensible power, but it's not real power over anyone or to do much of anything, and she's not really taught how to be a person. She's only taught how to be a priestess. And she's in this sort of sequestered world of women. She's surrounded by other priestesses, basically, and men aren't even allowed in the tombs of Atuan, except for men who've been castrated, eunuchs as they're called. And so she's in this world of women who basically don't actually have any real power. They're given the illusion of power, but don't really have any power. And that seemed to me such an interesting kind of allegory for the position that women are put in the real world. You know, they're given this idea that they'll have power if they become XYZ, where XYZ is some idea of femininity and what women should be, but really it's not power to do anything. And the story seems to me a process of her finding real power, of leaving this world, of breaking out of this world, out of, I guess, the patriarchy, if you will. And I thought it was really interesting on that level. So I really, really liked it. I thought it was much better written than the first book. I really liked Arha/Tanar as a character. I cannot wait to see what comes of her in the future books. So yeah, I really, really liked it. Maybe not a favorite exactly, but I really liked it. So yeah, I'll be continuing with the series. And then the last book that I just finished today was Into the Wild by Erin Hunter, the first book in her Warriors series of 6 books about Rusty, who gets renamed Firepaw, who joins a clan of feral cats in the woods, a clan called Thunder Clan, and this series was so huge for me when I was younger. I just gobbled these books up. I read so many of them. I kept reading them even when the books became obviously derivative and horrible. But I have to say that it was such a delight to revisit it because this has so much nostalgia for me, and the fact that it has so much nostalgia for me does make me worry that I won't really be able to judge this book or the series as a whole objectively because it has so much nostalgia that I'll just be reading it and, you know, revisiting my childhood reading. So you might want to say anything I take about the series with a grain of salt, but I will say that the writing in these books is not anything special, really. The literary style is not great. It's not bad, but it's not anything to write home about, so to speak. But the world is really well realized. There's a really kind of fascinating world that the author builds for these cats with, a whole religion, all these customs among these 4 clans of feral cats, and there's this whole warrior code that they need to follow, and that is all so well realized, and I think the characters are so vividly done as well. They're just really, characters who just really leap off the page, and you really care about them. So I think that it does that really, really well, and I won't say that I don't know if it would stand up to other series that have been written that are similar to it, but again, I can't judge it objectively because it was such a huge part of my childhood. And keep in mind that I'm not talking about all the books that I'm working on at the moment in this video. I will leave the books that are in progress but that I haven't really made enough progress for me to have any commentary on in the description, so keep an eye there if you care about that. But the books that I think I am going to start reading tomorrow are 2 rereads and 1 book that's kind of a holdover from last year. So I'll start with the 2 rereads. That's Haji Murad by Leo Tolstoy. And I read this in 2019, and it was my fiction book of the year. I loved it so much. I gushed about it in a whole long Boxer message to Sean the Book Maniac, who I buddy read it with, and I really have been itching to reread it and see if it holds up, so I will be reading that. It's very short, so I should be able to maybe do a video about it, maybe talk about it in my next Sunday Miscellany video, we will see. And then the next book that I think I'll start another reread is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which I read several years ago and has really stuck with me. I loved it when I read it, and I still think it's brilliant, and Jason from Old Boots Chapter and Verse is reading it right now, and he's been sending me Voxer messages about it, and that has just totally whetted my appetite in rereading it. And I think that George Eliot heavily influenced Virginia Woolf's style and writing, and I just read Middlemarch recently, and so I think that also has me itching to reread some Virginia Woolf, so I think I'll be reading that. Again, short, hopefully I can maybe read it by next week's Sunday Miscellany or do a video on it. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And then the last book I'm going to start, which is a holdover from last year, is I Put a Spell on You, the autobiography of Nina Simone, which I read about 3/4 of last year. I read up to there, so I only had a little bit left. I only have about 50 pages left of this book, and that's why I want to finish it, because I stopped reading it because I really got kind of bored and unhappy with the writing style. It is written in a style that's much more like an extended interview than a proper memoir, which I think really grated on me, but there are parts of it that I really, really enjoyed. I really liked the parts that were about Nina Simone sort of as an up-and-coming artist, you know, how she sang in small bars for months and months and months, sort of building a name for herself from the ground up like that, and her releasing her first album and coming to notoriety, and that sort of thing. And I was a little bit disappointed because I felt like there wasn't as much in it as I would have liked about the civil rights movement, about her civil rights work. But again, I read so deep into it that I feel like I should finish it. And because there were parts of it that I liked, I feel like I should finish it. So I will be finishing that. Won't be hard at all, and I should be able to talk about it in my next Sunday Miscellany video. And then finally, we get to talk about the movies that I've watched this week. And there are only 2 to talk about, one of which I don't have much to say about, and the other of which I have a lot to say about. So I'll start with the one that I don't have as much to say about, and that is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, directed by Robert Wiene. And this was released in 1920. It's a silent horror film. This was really my first feature-length silent film, and so it was a little tough for me in that regard. I'm not used to the language of silent films. I'm not used to following stories through the medium of silent films, and so I had a bit of a difficult time keeping track of what was even going on or what the story was. I think I would have benefited from reading a plot summary on Wikipedia beforehand, just to sort of make sure that I'm not constantly trying to figure out what the next plot development is, because it was difficult for me to keep track of that just through watching it. And I felt like the story itself, once I did finish it and got the grasp of what happened, I felt like the story was interesting, but nothing to write home about. I feel like the film is most interesting because of its visuals. It has a really weird visual style in terms of its cinematography. It has a lot of sort of frames where there's a lot of black in the shot, and it'll sort of circle in on someone, or there'll be a black frame within the frame. And there are a lot of set pieces that are very sort of angular and crooked and weird, and it had a very, very kind of Tim Burton-esque look to it, kind of like from The Nightmare Before Christmas, something like that. And it was really interesting in that sense. So it's very interesting historically. You can tell that probably a lot of modern directors have been influenced by it, but for me personally, I didn't really love it. And then the second film I watched was In the Mood for Love, directed by Wong Kar-wai. And this was so good. I actually watched it twice. I watched it on Friday, and I realized after I watched it that there was a lot that I missed, so I rewatched it yesterday, and it was even better the second time. It's so good. The musical selections are absolutely perfect. There's singing in Spanish by Nat King Cole, singing in really bad Spanish, but still a really good song. And then there's the piece that I included in my playlist earlier, which is used several times, and it's so good, used so well. There's such rich cinematography in Wong Kar-wai's film. You know, every shot of it feels incredibly deep and rich, you know, just his use of color and the sets he uses and the costumes that people, the clothes that people wear, and the way he shoots it just makes every frame look so deep and thick, and that's what I just love about it. And it just sort of boggles my mind that he does that so consistently throughout this film and 2046, which I watched last week. And what I think is so brilliant about Wong Kar-wai as a storyteller is that I think he looks at typical romantic stories, and if we think of a metaphor of words on a page for romantic stories, and the words, they're the lines, I think Wong Kar-wai makes stories about what's between the lines of the words on the page, of what tends to be told in romantic stories. You know, because usually in romantic stories we have, you know, marriages and breakups and heartbreak and so on and so forth. But in his films, it's all the stuff in between those, all the relationships that never quite happened but might have happened, and all the breakups or divorces or marriages that, you know, you can see maybe happening but don't ever quite happen. And that's what I love about him, as he's looking at what's between the lines, what we're not usually shown in movies and made to feel is important or profound, and I love that. So I'm all on the Wong Kar-wai bandwagon and want to watch more of his movies. I don't know when I'll be able to watch another because my library doesn't have very much Wong Kar-wai, but I will try. So anyway, it was a great week in that sense, not in other senses in terms of like the news and whatnot, but we're not talking about that here. If you have thoughts on any of the things I've talked about, then please let me know, and I will let you all go and talk to you later. Bye.